Hello everyone, welcome back to Rule the Roost podcast. I promised you at the end of my little rambling monologue-y speech, shouting into the ether, self-indulgent pods that I do after each defeat or win. I shouldn't say defeat, God, that's very glass empty, not even half empty, isn't it? I promised you that we'd have a good guest this week, and weirdly enough, I believe this is the first time I've had him on Rule the Roost, given that he is a long-time collaborator of mine. It's Mr. Billie T. How are you doing, mate? Welcome to...
Yeah,
is it the first time I've had
It's the very first time, yeah. I've been listening since the early days, since the first days of the podcast, man. Obviously, we've known each other for ages. We've done a lot of stuff together. So, yeah, it's an honour to finally be on. But I chose a pretty god-awful time to come. But, got to face these things, haven't we?
Well, I think this is good because, as I was saying to you yesterday on WhatsApp, I was like, mate, can you please just come on and just call me an idiot and, make this not a slog, if you like, because it's not been good the past couple of games, has it?
Yeah, and I was kind of thinking of things to contextualise the Man United performance and contextualise Arsenal being top of the league and stuff like that. And then we went and lost to Newcastle, and all that's gone out the window. So it's doom and gloom from here on in.
Mate, where do we even start with that Newcastle game? Honestly, because that to me is that's the nadir of Nuno, that performance. In terms of it's not even a comment on Conte as such. All of it, the players, their lack of kind of desire, the lack of fight there, and I get that they're tired. I do think that's a moving piece to this, and I think we probably need to include the fact that there's, I would imagine, an element of kind of grieving at the club after the passing of Ventroni. So we shouldn't just, I was kind of called out for that the other day on Twitter, and I thought fair enough, we can't just brush something like that under the carpet. But it felt, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, mate, but it felt a bit different yesterday. It felt a bit broken, like something wasn't quite right about it all.
Yeah, and I think the worry for me is stuff we've all seen before over the last 5 years, maybe since the end of the Pochettino tenure. And it's kind of the same, I can hack losing. We can all hack losing a game in Premier League football. It happens all the time. Man City lost last week, and that's fine. It happens all the time. But what we have these games where we can't string a 5-yard pass together. And that's the stuff that I can't hack as a fan. These footballers turn into they just melt. They melt into the atmosphere, and they don't turn up and they don't show up. And you get our defenders booting the ball out and passing straight to a Newcastle player. I know something which will come up a lot today, I'm sure, is our captain and our goalkeeper. He sort of sets a tone, I think, with that sometimes. I know we'll probably dive deeper into this a bit later, but sometimes you can kind of tell within Tottenham within the first 10, 15 minutes what kind of game they're going to have. And I thought we did all right at the beginning of the game against Newcastle, but then sometimes what kind of happens is Hugo drops a clanger, and then from that moment on, it kind of, that's it then for the rest of the team. The defence start getting shaky, they start kicking the ball into touch. Hugo himself starts punting balls into long balls into Sessegnon or Son or something like that, and it kind of sets the tone. And the worrying thing for me is we've seen these players make these mistakes for the last 5 years, and nothing seems to have changed in that department. I hope that it's just a blip and we'll get over it in the next game. But the worrying thing for me is we've seen this happen so many times before over the last 5 years.
Are you? Let's dive in on Lloris, mate, because where are you at with him, mate? Because I'm, this is the thing. I don't want any of this stuff to come across as knee-jerk because, I've put out sort of long and impassioned kind of defences of Lloris, his importance to the club, his servitude to the club, everything that he's done basically in our shirt. But I'm not going to lie, man. I am starting to get that worry that it's getting close to the kind of thanks for the memories, but it's time to say goodbye banner. Do you know what I mean? It's...
Yeah, and I think even... So, I don't think we're knee-jerking to say we need to get rid of him in the next game, start Fraser Forster or anything like that. But I just think we need to have in the conversation of what's next. Because he is still a fantastic goalkeeper. That Man United game, he was making some of the best saves he's made in his career. There is a great goalkeeper in there. But even if he wasn't making the mistakes that he's making, and even if he was, still playing at that level, just going by his age, we need to start a succession plan, which we haven't really started to even think about yet. So I think coupled with the mistakes that he's making, it's got to be a conversation soon. something has got to start getting into place of what we're going to do next. But I don't think it's a simple thing to say. We need to get rid of him this season, at the end of the season. I just think we need to start having the conversation. What do we do next?
Because the thing is, it's like it is an expensive job to get rid of him, right? To replace him, I mean, like you surely are going for all right. He's not. I mean, in my opinion, like he was probably the best he's ever been for us last season. But was that like a bit of a swan song or something? I don't know, because it feels like I was sort of saying in the little solo pod thing. We can look at performances like the Man United performance, him pulling off sort of worldy save after worldy save. But Lloris has always been able to do that, man. And I'm not devaluing that. He's got the reflexes of a cat. He's unbelievable at that. Like the Luke Shaw volley, sort of. I think it was Rashford who had a chance, a sort of one-on-one chance, and he was out full stretch and just sort of got that snapshot. But Lloris will still, it's these like lapses. Obviously, his distribution, but it's the lapses in concentration and stuff like that seem to be. I don't know, they're almost like weekly at the moment, right? And it's sort of come back with a bang after that Brighton arm injury and everything like that, when he was probably at his worst at that point in that sort of 2019 season.
And I think the thing for me is it's costing us dearly at the moment, because in the Arsenal game we were 1-1. We were, you could argue that we were on top of the game at that point, and then he sort of drops a clanger, and they go on to win 3-1. Yesterday, I thought we were on top of Newcastle until he dropped that mistake, and again that ended up costing us the game. But I do think the job of replacing Hugo Lloris is going to be incredibly, incredibly difficult. Like, we've had a world-class goalkeeper for 10 years, and it's not going to happen. That's not going to happen again. So I just think we have to sort of prioritise, what do we want in a goalkeeper next? Do we want someone that can play out from the back and really comfortable with their feet? Do we want someone who's, an incredible shot stopper like Hugo Lloris? Because we're not going to be able to drop the money or drop the sort of have the prestige to go and buy someone who can do all of those things, like the very, very top tier of goalkeeper in the world. There are very few available that are anywhere near sort of Hugo's level in the first place. So I think we're going to see a drop off in the performance of goalkeepers, because we're replacing one of the best goalkeepers to ever grace the Premier League. But I just thought we have to be smart about if we're going to, again, this is probably something that will come up in a minute. If we're going to stick with Antonio Conte for the next few years, what kind of goalkeeper fits the system best? Because the way that we're playing at the moment, I don't think this current version of Hugo Lloris is working with the system, because it's inviting a lot of pressure, and the mistakes are costing us dearly in big games at big moments, which is sad, really, because he is an incredible servant for our club. And I do think it's going to be a very, very hard job to replace him. But like I was saying, I do think maybe the conversation is sort of needed now.
I mean, this is the thing that's quite mad. Like you touch on there, and it's true, is because I've seen already, and this is, people can do this, and I understand it. Like, I'm not here to sort of police anybody's kind of, we all have knee-jerk reactions to stuff, right? And I've seen, obviously, the first point of call for this kind of thing is, bloody Enoch, they haven't bought a new goalkeeper when we should have done, blah, 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 blah. But, I mean, on that sort of side of things, I'm like, well, genuinely, though, who do we replace Lloris with? Like, in terms of in the past few years, I don't think it's in any way going to be even now, like you say there, Bill, like an easy job to replace Hugo Lloris. You are talking like, if you want to get a better keeper than him, well, who are we talking? We're talking Alisson, we're talking Edison, because we ain't going to be able to buy keepers like that. And I'm sure there's people that do a lot more scouting stuff than I do, which is zero. But they're going to say, well, there's this guy in the Bundesliga or something like that. Great, fine, that's good. But I think we can all admit, though, they will still be an unproven quantity. They will still be, what we will be signing will still always be a gamble. We can have as much data in place to suggest that a player will potentially be very good and they are performing at a certain level in a league outside of the Premier League, which, again, let's not pretend that means nothing. I'm not going all like Nigel Farage about this. Just, we know the Premier League is a supremely competitive, high-intensity football league, right? So if we're not signing, like, say, Oblak, who we were linked to, who what you'd imagine, what was his release clause? I think 100 mil or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Around that figure. If we're not spending that amount of money, then we are looking to sign somebody. I know it's not to say it can't happen. Look, I mean, Southampton has signed that. To be fair, they've signed him from City's academy. That the young Irish keeper, I can't remember his name, but he looks unbelievable. So it's not to say that it can't happen, but there is going to be a period of uncertainty, and it is going to be difficult. But it does feel like it's something that we got to maybe start getting in place now, right? I mean, we've had a lot. I mean, this is a more uncomfortable conversation to have about Hugo Lloris. And it's something that was raised to me by, I won't name them just in case they don't want to get any flack, but I was chatting to a pal on WhatsApp, and they were saying, not as a definitive thing, but we talk about, like you were saying there, Bill, like over the past few years at Spurs, we've seen various different managers, and there's that common trend of when things aren't going our way, heads drop, and the players just don't look like they're up for it. There's just some unknown quantity there where it doesn't matter if it's Conte, like we saw yesterday. It doesn't matter if it's Mourinho. It doesn't matter if it's Nuno or even Poch in his last season. Sometimes the players, when they're gone from a game, they're just gone. Does any of that lie with our, like, one common denominator here is our captain, Hugo Lloris? Is there a question to be asked that maybe he's not a great captain? Maybe he doesn't rally the troops in a way that we see him shouting and screaming at people like Son in documentaries and stuff. But is that a bit old hat now? Is that what players want anymore? Especially when the captain's dropping clangers all the time, and then he comes into the changing room screaming and shouting at them. Is that part of the problem? I don't know.
I think it's certainly worth being in the conversation, because I think the thing with Hugo is he's a terrific, like, role model. You know, other than I know he's had his problems in the past, but he's a model pro. We've seen in the documentary he can be a great talker, but I just think sometimes he just doesn't back it up in the pitch because his nerves become really, really apparent, and he just kind of like sometimes he's so bad with his feet, and it happened against Man United on Wednesday, but he did manage to turn it around. But he kicked the ball straight to a Man United player, and then suddenly the rest of the defence gets nervous. So I think if we look over the last 5 years, who are the players that are still here and have been here the whole time? You've got Hugo Lloris, you've got Eric Dyer, you've got Ben Davis, you've got Son, you've got Kane, off the top of my head. And those guys are all still in the starting 11, and they've been in the starting 11 since the Poch days. Well, some of them have even been backups in the Poch days and are now starting. And you have to sort of like think that some of those players are the players that continually make mistakes. Now, I know that I listen to this podcast every single week, and I know we've all been bigging up Eric Dyer the last few, and he's had a brilliant season, but he's just starting to return to that sort of that Eric Dyer that we saw in the last few years, and like the Nuno and the Jose, when he's making those mistakes again.
Like worryingly quickly, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, it's kind of like he's made one mistake and then suddenly he's back to the old Eric Dyer that was making them every single week under those managers. Hugo Lloris the same. He's made one mistake in the last few years and few weeks, and suddenly that Hugo Lloris seems to be coming back. And I wonder, and I don't want to be knee-jerk and say we need to get rid of all these players, but I just think maybe we just need to start rebuilding the squad at a higher level. And we're seeing signs of it slowly. Like, we've added some really good players to the first 11, like Bentancur, Kulusevski and Romero. That's a slowly building a really, really good squad that can compete at the level we want to. But the fact is, there's a lot of players that were still here under Pochettino that are still getting in the 11 now. And I think maybe until we sort of at least have options where we can rotate them, or these players we improve on them, then we're still going to see these same kind of mentality issues and same kind of mistakes. I think of those players that I just mentioned there, I think probably Harry Kane is the only one who's kind of like consistently been above the level that we know he is, and he's always sort of performing across the 5 years. He's continually performed at a high level, other than when he had that sort of 8 weeks under Nuno or whatever it was. But I think the same mistakes are creeping in because it's the same group of players. So what do you really expect to change?
See, this is an interesting thing, mate, because I was talking to the same anonymous pal who I was just referencing there, and I was saying, like, and please, before you or anyone else jumps on me, I'm just saying, this is just, after a game, right? We all have sort of not even knee-jerk thoughts, just your head is all over the shop sometimes, right? Especially when it's kind of a performance like that last night, when we were frustrated about Old Trafford away, but I think even through most of our frustrations, there's that internal voice that's like, it's Man United away though at the end of the day. Like, come on, like, give your head a wobble. Tottenham and many other teams just lose at United. That's one of those things. A game like this yesterday, Newcastle, it's a bit harder to do that. And you do sort of just throw around kind of shit that's just there floating about. And what you sort of touch on there, mate, is like one of those things where I was sort of thinking like, because yeah, I have backed Eric Dyer like to the hilt this year. I backed Ben Davies a lot, backed Son, Hugo, even Harry Kane in the past. But is there anything to be said that before we can really start to rebuild, before we can actually really start to actually think about a new era of Tottenham, that we probably do just need to get rid of most of these players? And dare I say, like, I mean, Harry Kane is a different conversation, but there's even some parts where I sometimes, even I personally, and I love Harry Kane, I don't think I'm ever going to see a better player in a Tottenham shirt in my entire lifetime. But do we sometimes like live under this cloud of, is he going to stay? Is he going to go? Does it create a bit of instability or anything like that, do you feel, in the team and what we're trying to achieve when we are talking about building something new?
Yeah, and I think what we at the very least need to do is provide like proper competition for these players. Because if we take Eric Dyer in isolation just for a second, like, so he's a centre back. He's been a brilliant centre back. So what is his motivation at the moment? So before this season, at the beginning of the season, his motivation was probably thinking, right, I want to get back into the England squad, which he's done. He's been a brilliant centre back for us. Now he's in the England squad. He has no one in our squad that replaces him ever. He's our only centre back that we have. So if he has a bad game, he knows he's going to play the next game. He's in the England squad at the moment. So where is Eric Dyer's motivation coming from now? So it's not just about maybe getting rid of Eric Dyer and burning the whole thing to the ground. It's buying another centre back that if Dyer makes a mistake, you're out the team for a game. Now you have to win your place back and stuff like that. So I just think we're on a very, very slow period of rebuilding the squad. And this is how slow it's been, because Pochettino spoke about this like 5-6 years ago to Gary Lineker. It's going to be a painful rebuild. We're still undergoing that painful rebuild now. 5-6 years later, hasn't happened really, has it? A lot of the big name players are still here, really. So
the most painful of it's been Delhi, right?
Yeah, of course. And maybe,
I suppose Toby and Jan,
and Toby and Jan, and that's the kind of thing which we're seeing at the moment. The players that were backups to Toby and Jan are now starting for us like 5 years later.
I saw somebody tweet that earlier. It's pretty alarming, isn't it, when you put it like that?
And I know that you can sort of debate whether Romero has been brilliant over the last few games. I personally think the last couple of games he's played, he's looked as if he's getting back to his best. But he's like the only defender we've bought for a while that's anywhere sort of in the conversation with those two. Those two are such incredible defenders, two of the best centre-backs the Premier League's ever seen. But 5-6 years later, we don't have anyone on that level. Romero's like a good step in the right direction, hopefully. But we just, the fact is of all of these things is you have to buy quality if you want quality. And we started to do it over the last couple of transfer windows. But like Conte was saying, I think straight after the game, it's going to take 2-3 windows to do it. I just think we need to buy more quality, really, if we go back to the original point of this conversation, if we want to get these kind of performances out the way. It's going to take a while, but we're hopefully on the right steps.
I mean, I know he's your boy to a degree, but when you look at someone like Emerson Royale, for example, right, it worries me in the respect that I want to talk about Sessegnon more at length, but I think our wingbacks are a particular issue, right? It's such an important cornerstone of what it is what Mourinho wanted to do, what even Pochettino wanted to do before. We've been needing new wingbacks since Pochettino's time, really, since Danny Rose kind of went on his decline and we sold Kyle Walker. We didn't adequately replace either of them, and it's been the case ever since then. There's even the case that, like, you look at it yesterday, you think, have we even upgraded on Trippier? Like, genuinely, it's quite stark, when you think about how poor the recruitment has been in that area in particular.
I think it's an interesting one in particular because, Antonio Conte football is all about wingbacks. And we have 4 wingbacks. I wouldn't say at the moment any of them are playing at a particular level that an Antonio Conte wingback needs to play. I think Perisic is, due to his age, he's going to have ups and downs. He's a terrific delivery of the ball. Great mentality, great with the ball at his feet, but he doesn't have the legs of the man to go up and down the wing like Sessegnon does. Whereas Sessegnon doesn't have the delivery that Perisic has. So on the left-hand side, we don't have a world-class fullback out of any of the four. That's for certain. And on the right side, we have Doherty and Emerson, who are, if we're being brutally honest, neither are good enough for what we want to be. They're just not. I know Doherty has sort of moulded himself into a passable wing-back for Antonio Conte's system, but you could easily upgrade all four of our wing-backs, I think. And I think until we do that, I don't think this system is going to thrive, especially, and again, this is another thing which I'm sure we'll talk about later, we've really, really, really missed Dejan Kulusevski. And it's been made so apparent over the last few games, but without Kulusevski and without a decent wing-back, we just have nothing going forward. We just have absolutely nothing. So for me, that's got to be our priority over the next two windows, January and summer. We need a whole new approach to our wing-backs, and hopefully Udoji will be a sort of good. He looks like a decent player that's going to come in, and he looks. Funny enough, our best wing-back seems to be playing for a different club at the moment, which kind of sums us up as a club. But yeah, it's a huge area of concern is our wing-backs. I don't at the moment. I don't know if any of the four are as good as we want them to be in order to sort of challenge at the very top.
I mean, Cess to me is probably the most disappointing out of all of that, because I don't know. I'm sort of parodying myself now, but I've always sort of held onto this idea, this belief that, I guess from seeing like his explosive sort of start to his career at Fulham, and I think just glimpses of sort of quality, that he is going to suddenly just like bang, that's it. It's going to click, as we keep saying of Tottenham at the moment. It's going to click, and suddenly you're going to start to see this proper kind of performance from Ryan Sessegnon. I guess similar. I'm not saying he was ever going to be on the same level, but similar to how we saw with Bale. You know, a sort of stuttering start, injured, in and out of the team, and then suddenly bang, there was just a catalyst, and he went off flying. And we can't compare him. Like, Gareth Bale is, let's be honest, one of the greatest footballers of all time. So it's unfair to hold him to that sort of standard. But if you get what I mean, like, I think we have been sort of a lot of us anyway, I would say a large amount of Spurs fans, probably the majority, have kind of held hope in Sessegnon and given him a lot of time and given him a lot of patience. But I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get to that point where, like, I don't think we're seeing enough, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting one. Like, he's such a confidence player. I think if you looked at all the season overall, at the moment, he's probably been the best of the four wing-backs.
Yeah.
But the last few games, he's been really poor. And he's another one of those players that as soon as he makes a mistake, that's it for him. He's gone for the rest of the game. Like it happened yesterday. His head really, really dropped yesterday. I know he ended up getting subbed. But he's another one of those players that's one thing starts to go wrong, they just like crumble under the pressure. And I don't know what it is about our players that seems to be true for quite a few of our players. As soon as we make a couple of mistakes, that's it. But I thought he was showing some really promising signs earlier in the season. And he kind of, I know Conte swapped him for Perisic in the game, and then since then he hasn't really looked. The last couple of games, I think he's been like objectively bad. Especially yesterday, I thought he was really poor. It's probably one of his worst games of the season. I just think like he's such a confidence player. It's difficult to manage him because when his head goes, that's it. His performance drops significantly. So if he's not feeling confident, then his performance really drops, I think.
I feel like he's 100% going to be one of those players that will probably end up selling to Everton or Southampton or something like that.
I'm literally thinking he's got like Everton all over him, hasn't he?
And it'll be another like Kyle Walker-Peters. He'll start sort of playing quite well there, and there will be that culture war between fans of why did we sell him? And then people saying like, well, remember when he was playing for us, he didn't do that well. And other people saying, yeah, but look, he's been given a bit of time and patience, and now he's kind of. So I think I just believe he's going to be one of those players that's always going to polarise people. I think he's when I say this stuff about him, there's a player in there and stuff. I think he's a more than serviceable Premier League footballer, right? And it's just the hope that with his age and with the kind of appropriate nurturing that he might be able to build on that and be more than that and show us some of what we saw when he was young and at Fulham, because the Championship still isn't a piece of piss, you know, especially for a young player. It's a pretty physical, pretty sort of strong league. So, I don't know. It's just a tough one with him.
I think you've got to worry about his future as well because of the fact that we've signed Destiny Udogie, who is doing all the kind of things that Sessegnon was doing a few years ago, where he sort of he's going into quite a lot of games and either scoring or assisting, which Sessegnon is not doing as much at the moment. I know he had a pretty decent run at I think he scored in our first game of the season, didn't he? But under Fulham, what did he get? He's getting like 15 goals for Fulham a season, wasn't
Something mad, yeah, or
Something
at least
crazy like that.
goal
And he had
contributions.
that like Dele Alli thing of just being always in the right place. But it just seems like he's lost that sort of knack for scoring goals. He doesn't pick up that many assists, and if you're in an Antonio Conte system, that's the sort of bare minimum for a wing back. You have to be having such a huge influence on the game that if you don't be doing that, you're going to be replaced. And I just worry for him with the fact we're signing one of the most promising left backs in Europe. So, is he going to see himself as a backup left back at Tottenham, or is he going to go to someone like Everton and be their main left back again? It's kind of he's kind of seems to be back where he started a couple of years ago, where he wasn't really getting in the team that much. And if Perisic stays for another year, which I think he's got a 2-year contract, hasn't he? I think. Then we've got 3 left backs again, and you wonder what will happen with Sessegnon, I think.
Are you again, might be a knee-jerk opinion. I think there's enough good there, but are we seeing that much great from Ivan Perisic this season? Because yeah, go on, mate.
I think he's dipped the last few games, definitely. But I think that was always going to happen when you sign a player of that age. And I think the problem is we may be at the point where we need a player. We need him to play more than what he physically can, like because we don't have that many decent options on the left hand side. Son's been out of form. Sessegnon's sort of up and down with form. We need a player that can come in and play all the time if we're going to improve. And I don't think Perisic can physically offer that at the moment. I don't know. The last couple of games have been a little bit of a disappointment, but we know how quality is. We've seen it. We've seen his delivery. We've seen his assists and things. I just don't know if he's got the legs to play for us at the moment as much as we need him to. So again, it's a little bit of a worry at the moment, to be honest.
It's just feels like it. I mean, one of the most important things I reckon we probably need to remember throughout all this is that this is pretty unprecedented, the sort of the turnaround in fixtures and everything at the moment to accommodate this bizarre World Cup. A lot of these players probably are knackered because, I mean, one of the big conversations is Son, right? And I think there is definitely sort of talk to be had about the level that Son's performing at, but to me, he seems all right, really. I think he started the season very poorly. But since that sort of point, I think he's been looking a bit more like the old Son. I just think he just looks knackered.
And again, that kind of goes back to the same discussion we were having at the beginning where we don't, we have been unlucky with injuries, like Richarlison and Kulusevski both getting injured is hugely impactful on our performances, I think. But we just don't, at the moment, we don't have anyone who can replace Son, so he's ended up having to play every single game. And these players, I think this is probably one of our biggest problems overall, is we have our starting 11 and we're not rotating it that much. And these players are just knackered at the moment. We don't have someone that can come in and play with Kane up front at the moment. Now Richarlison's injured. He doesn't seem to trust Brian Hill that much that he'd bring him on a game that we need to win or anything like that. I think you'll happily bring him on if we're already winning and to stretch the defenders, but he's not going to replace Son with Hill if we need to be winning the game and we're already losing or something like that. So, and I also think the psychology of having a World Cup in a few weeks, if we go back to Perisic, it's going to be his last ever World Cup for Croatia. That's a fact. So these players must be playing knowing one injury and they're done, the World Cup's done. And we saw it with Varane at Man United the other day. And I do think that must have. These guys are human beings, aren't they? That it must always be there in the back of their mind that maybe they're not going to go in for that tackle or they're not going to try and beat that player in case they do their hamstring and stuff like that. I think the psychology of this crazy World Cup and also the demands of the schedule is just mad. I can't believe we're in this situation, and who thought this was ever a good idea? And I do think those are the kind of things which are impacting our performances as well.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's a weird one, isn't it? Because it does feel like even when we were sort of winning games at the start of the season, we were basically all asking, are we actually good or not? I can't really tell. And it is really hard to draw sort of conclusions because the thing is, I'll have a moan about it after the game and stuff. But when I sort of reflect on things a bit, I still think, well, top of our Champions League group, we're still in the top four. One would say that we're still objectively a good team in many respects. But when you see sort of performances like that last night that are really hard to watch, it's like, is this just an aberration? Is this a bad day at the office? Or is this the sign of things starting to catch up with us? Do you know what I mean? I think it's to me, it's been one of the hardest times sort of the past few years, really. I guess post Pochettino, to get a proper handle on where Spurs are and what we are, because it feels like the way we ended last season, it suddenly was like, fuck, right, we're actually seeing now the impact of a world-class manager coming in and working with a squad of players that we've perhaps sort of dug out too much for the past few months or the past couple of years. All that they needed was some proper guidance, some proper training, and they'll be back on a kind of even keel, and we can start to sort of look ahead and think big again.
Yeah, and I do think there are, if we sort of reflect on everything as a whole, there are definitely some causes for optimism. I don't want to, spend this whole time slagging off our players and stuff, because if we look at some things which are going to go, hopefully, change for us. Well, firstly, yesterday we had Romero, Højbjerg, Kulusevski, Richarlison all injured, and there are 3 nailed-on starters there, and Richarlison, who has been starting quite a lot for us. I think when you talk about the back end of last season, a lot of the things that were good was because of Dejan Kulusevski. He is that good. He's an incredible player for us. And I think sometimes we overthink football and think, oh, we're playing terrible. But sometimes it's just a case of we're missing one of our best players.
Yeah.
And when he comes back, we'll hopefully see that level of performances again from the whole team. Because he is like our glue between our creativity, our scoring threat, and scoring goals himself. He does all of those things in one amazing player. And I think he started 6 league games this year, which is, I think we played 12 league games. He started 6 of them. And I think I'm right in saying we've won all 6 that he started in, and we've won 3 of the 6 which he hasn't played in. So sometimes, things like that, with Kulusevski back in the team, I do think will improve. I think if we can sort of get to the World Cup, we've got 3 games left, Bournemouth, Leeds and Liverpool. You'd expect us to win at least 2 of those games, at least. Hopefully 3. If we turn up against Liverpool and beat them, then I think we'll have some optimism going into the World Cup. But if we can sort of crawl our way to that World Cup still in the top 4, then I think we're nowhere near playing at the level that we can play at. And I think once that World Cup's out of the way, all of those sort of psychology things of this stupid World Cup are out of the way, I think we can really, really kick on from there. And at the moment, we're all doom and gloom. It feels awful, but we're still 3rd in the Premier League at the moment. So I do think that hopefully it's a case of, if we can sort of crawl our way to that World Cup, regroup at the end of December or whatever it is, and then I think we can kick on again. Because if you remember this time last year, we had Nuno as manager on this day, and we still managed to get to the top 4 by the end of it. So we're already in the top 3, and then we've still got half a season to go, and hopefully we'll have our players returning from injury and things like that. I do think there are still sometimes some calls to be, to be an optimist about these things.
I'm sure you know by now that I'm a bit of a Conte skeptic. Just wanted to sort of touch on something you were saying there about Dejan Kulusevski and his kind of impact in the tail end of that year. Is there at all a question to be had that maybe we haven't actually played that well under Conte, that a lot of it was down to him having Kulusevski playing freakishly well?
I think it was a kind of a sort of mixture of all of those things. Maybe we got lucky in the fact that Kulusevski, Kane and Son sort of instantly became a better front 3 than anyone ever imagined. And in that back end of last season, from that Man City game onwards, they were unbelievable every single game. And we saw the best out of all 3 players. But I do think, it's one of those classic football philosophies, isn't it? Is that because Antonio Conte is, training them and managing them to play that way, or is it just pure luck or whatever? That's kind of interesting philosophical debate. But I do think that the fact that we look at the moment, we're looking like we've sort of ran out of ideas going forward, and he sort of, everyone knows I'm a big fan of Antonio Conte. I just question at the moment what's some of the patterns of rotation that we're going through, where he's sticking by some of the players that aren't playing particularly well. And we've got players on the bench that seem to, just never even get a look in when people like Emerson Royale play every single week and they're not good enough. So I think it's very valid to have some questions about some of the decisions that he's making, but I do think he is the manager that I think will take us to the next level if we back this guy. And I think overall, if we back this guy, we're going to see a lot of success.
I mean, just to be clear, I was being a little bit churlish. I do think he has improved like a lot of our players individually and stuff like that.
I do think the questions at the moment are going to come, aren't they? Because that level of performance, like you said at the very beginning, that was a Nuno performance against both Manchester United and Newcastle. And if you remember last season, though, we did that against Wolves and Southampton back to back, and then we sort of timed it around and went on a big run. So hopefully it's a blip rather than a pattern.
Yeah. I mean, in your gut, mate? Well, like, what do you actually? Because I am always tossing this stuff about. Is it, because we've sort of spoken about, does the system put too much pressure on the individuals? Does the system kind of inhibit players from being more expansive? Do you know what I mean? All this sort of various different stuff. I think like you say, like, football isn't always that complicated, and I think that one of the main things is, and this I guess this is kind of down to Conte's design, but one of the main things is that we don't really have many players that are that good, or at least that explosive at progressing the ball outside of Dejan Kulusevski, because our wingbacks aren't very effective at doing it, and our centre midfielders. I mean, I think Højbjerg's had a great season. I think Bentancur is fantastic. I'm so delighted with him, but neither of them are a Christian Eriksen, a James Maddison, if you like. There you go. There's a prime example of somebody we've been linked with heavily. But neither of them are that type of midfielder, are they? And so things are always going to look a bit sort of turgid, look a bit dour. But outside of that, like yesterday, it did bother me. Yeah, Conte's touched on this himself, saying about, like, in these sort of big moments, we shrink, we fade away. And he's not saying anything wrong there. It doesn't trigger me as somebody that's like I said, whatever, Conte skeptic or whatever fucking labels we want to give this shit. I don't think he's saying anything incorrect there. We've said this, top of the table under Mourinho, and we came up against Liverpool, who were looking awful at that point, and we still sort of buckled to them. It's hard to know, kind of, I don't know. I keep coming back to, like, maybe it is Lloris, maybe it's the captain. Ultimately, maybe his impact on the team is much bigger than we sort of know it is. And I don't think it's fair to, like, make a scapegoat of somebody, but we're sort of running out of avenues to really explore for this sort of inexplicable habit that Tottenham have of just kind of throwing away any sort of sign of promise that they seem to keep building, right?
Yeah, and I think we're at a similar crossroads that we've been in the past. We've been there with Redknapp, we've been there with Pochettino, where we're a decent side, but we need to take the next step. And I think we're at a crossroads of Antonio Conte, certainly as his contract runs out this year. And I know he's got an option of one, but I think the plan is they want him to extend it. Is, do we just fully back this man now, to give him everything that he wants, and hope that it takes us to that sort of the next step being we want trophies and we want to really compete for the top level of the league? Or do we sort of half back him, buy a couple of players in the transfer window, and just hope that he gets scrapes by? Now, that didn't happen with Redknapp and Pochettino because they weren't fully backed in the transfer windows. And as a result, a few months later, when we were, a couple of years after being a really top level team, we dropped off and they were both sacked. So are we now going to sort of step forward as a club and say, right, we know that Conte needs decent wing backs, we know he needs a James Maddison type player, let's go out and spend the money. And the thing which I think really sort of brings it home for me is we've seen what happens with Arsenal. Like, what they've done over the last few years is they've decided, right, let's just keep Arteta and we're going to back him every single transfer window. We're going to give him a load of money. We're going to let him buy the players he wants. We're going to let him get rid of the players that he wants. And if you think about Arteta's first few seasons at Arsenal, he was never anywhere near the top four. And Conte's first season, he finished fourth. But Arsenal stuck by Arteta and they backed him. And now this is the first time this season when they're really sort of seeing the fruits of all that. So it's the same kind of crossroads that we find ourselves over the last few years. As, do we now fully back a manager, like with proper spend, proper quality players coming in? Or do we just sort of give him, a few players and hope that he sort of drags us to the next level? Or do we put our money where our mouth is and back him? And personally, I think it's an easy decision for me. I think we got to back this guy, see where he takes us for the next 3 years. But you can sort of see why people are starting to question it because the performances have been poor this season overall. But I think we've seen enough from Antonio Conte, his career, from what he did last season, to know this guy is the one we need to back. Just go out there and back him and see what happens. And if that fails, then we're doomed forever as a club, I think.
It's mad, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. It's tough for him, isn't it? Because he's obviously in that position where he doesn't want to commit to Spurs because he's worried, and you can tell he's clearly worried that once we've got him locked down to a contract, we're going to go back on promises or whatever and not spend it. I understand he kind of wants to keep the club on their toes. He wants them to,
which they did to Pochettino in some respects. Like
Yeah.
they didn't back him in the transfer window enough, and look what happened there in the end.
But then on the flip side, I do look at it from the club's perspective, and I think like, well, it's hard for them to just hand over 200 mil or something. I think like that's the rumor, isn't it? That we've said we'll give him 200 mil if he signs a 2-year contract.
And that's what Arsenal have given Arteta the last couple of transfer windows is 200 million.
Yeah.
And look at them now; they're absolutely that. If we're really honest about the game of football, I mean the Premier League where it is now, you need to be spending that kind of money in the summer to have any chance of not just sort of being top four, but being something above that.
Yeah, if you want to compete, you have to, don't you?
And we're competing with arguably the greatest side ever assembled in Premier League history. So that's the kind of thing that we need. And it's again, are we actually going to take the step and do it? Or are we going to sort of go from manager to manager, hoping that one day we get a miracle? Or are we actually going to take that step finally?
It to me, I think the main thing it feels like, while the contract stuff is the way it is that I'm talking about from my perspective. I'm not talking about from the club or the players. I'm not sort of assuming how any of the players are feeling about stuff. I just think like what sort of stunts my real ability to kind of get fully on board with Conte and with everything that we're trying to do, most of all, is the fact that there's so much uncertainty as to whether or not he even seems to want to be at the club. And I get it. I understand. I completely get your perspective, and I get like a lot of people's perspectives that this is a guy that's won a lot, and he clearly is a good manager and everything like that. I'm just like, at the moment, I can't sort of see. I can't look 3-4 years down the line and think that's what we're building towards with him. Something at that point, because my big concern is that like he wants it now. That he wants to be at Madrid or PSG or something like that. And this was the kind of stuff I was worried about before we signed him. I'm not just saying this as a knee jerk, but I'm sure I've sort of said this stuff for a while about him, and I just do have this sort of. It's great. Like I think the main thing is right. He needs to get the assurances. How the club do that or not, I don't know. They have spent a fair amount already with him there, so hopefully that's a start. I just want to believe that like this is it now, right? We're here, we're in a place, and we are looking 3-4 years down the line. We are looking at like we're not just looking at squeezing every last drop from Son and Kane. I guess the signing of Richarlison was a good step towards that, but we've seen us linked with Osimhen from Napoli. We want to start to think of that contingency plan. There's no guarantees that Kane signs a new contract. I think it's up next year, isn't it? At the end of his contract.
And I think an interesting thing about that too is that I honestly believe that they go very much hand in hand as well. I think if, say, for example, we finish like 6th this season and get rid of Conte, I think Kane and Conte's futures are both hand in hand, to be honest. Like I think for me that's a huge factor in giving this guy Conte everything that he wants is Harry Kane. So I just think if there's any kind of doubt, even someone. Say, for example, Conte left and Pochettino came in. I don't think that's enough for Kane at this point in time.
No, definitely not.
He'll go straight to Bayern Munich in the summer. I think our only chance of getting more time out of Harry Kane is if Conte signs that extension. And I just think we're at this crossroads now. It's the right time for... And I include Conte in that as well. Conte has got to sign that extension. He's got to start believing that he can be the one to do this. I think we're all at a point now. Let's just go for this step. Let's sign the extension, give Conte what he wants. Let's move forward as a club. And let's actually take this step for once. Let's go and spend some money in the transfer market. We started last summer, baby steps, had a pretty decent window overall. We did spend some money. That's a good first step. So now let's take the next one.
Do you feel like his heart's in it though, mate? Like genuine, because I think this is probably one of my biggest barriers of him is that I just don't. I get it. I think the important thing is that gets pointed out to me is what you got to remember is he is a pretty like. It's just kind of his demeanor, right? It's what he's like. He does come across as quite a dour, sort of angry man a lot of the time. So you kind of can't take too much of that on board. But I still never. I don't know how much I get the feeling that like he loves the thought of like taking Spurs on, or whether he even thinks it's possible. I don't even know if it's possible. This is the thing. This is I wouldn't dig him out for saying that, because I look at teams like Manchester City and I do think, as I've been saying over the last few pods, like, what is it that we're, as Spurs fans, trying to enjoy out of football? You know, because the chances are that we really might not ever win a Premier League. It's not to say we won't, definitely not, but there's every chance that we might not, unless, you know, Jeff Bezos or whoever takes us over. But I don't know. Do you know what I mean, mate? Do you feel that like Conte is ever just kind of keeping himself warmed up, keeping himself limber, if you like, until Madrid or Newcastle or whoever come and say, "Here's 500 mil, do what you can, piss the league," and you know.
I think it's an interesting one. I think he'd be mad not to be honest. Like, I think he'd be crazy not to be, because at the moment he's at a club. If you believe the rumours, we're going to pay him 20 million a year, which makes him one of the very highest paid managers in the world. He's got like one of the best stadiums in world football. He's got the potential. Everything that we sort of need to become a big club is there. Like the infrastructure-wise, we're about to hopefully sign this mega stadium rights deal. We're seeing all the kind of steps which you take to become an elite club. We're starting to do. So if he is the man that takes us from being a top four club to someone that wins major honours, that's going to be on his CV forever, because no manager has done it under the the last 20 years or so. No manager has ever done it at Tottenham to that level. And I think he would be crazy right now well, firstly, I don't think there's any job in Europe at the moment that's particularly tempting for him, because, you know, PSG are pretty much sorted at the moment. They just got Gaultier, who seems to be doing quite well. Real Madrid are winning absolutely everything, left, right and centre under Ancelotti. Juventus and Serie A teams are just broke at the moment. He's never ever going to get 20 million a year at a Serie A team anytime soon. The only clubs that are non-Premier League that could kind of match that are PSG, Real Madrid. You know, even Barcelona can't currently compete with that kind of level of salary for a manager. No way. So he would be mad, I think. So as much as we talk about he's a great asset for Tottenham, I also think Tottenham are a great asset for him. And I think sometimes he might not look as if he says that or believes that. But I do think if he's, we're a great fit for him as well, because we're ready to now go and become an elite club. And I think he's got to start realising that and maybe start believing it a bit more as well. So I think he'd be crazy not to think that this is the club for him.
Maybe he does, because this is part of it, right? I think we talk about assurances and stuff like that. He probably does just want to feel, doesn't he, that he is actually going to get the money and be able to. Because, like you say, Arsenal they're probably going. I reckon they're going to push City all the way. Do you know what I mean?
And I genuinely believe that Conte is going to sign the extension before or around the time of the World Cup. I think he'd be crazy not to. Why wouldn't you? You're going to have a top salary. You're going to have a top. I do think we're going to back him. So I do think, after all these things at the moment, it feels very, very doom and gloom and knee jerk and all of this kind of stuff. Get rid of the whole squad and all that. But I think that we're going to come out the other side of this on top. I really do. Not literally top of the league, but in a decent place, because I believe that he's going to extend. I really do believe that.
I wonder if him and Kane have genuinely had the conversation with one another, just to kind of off the record. Are you going to stay? Well, are you going to stay? Well, I don't know. Are you going to stay? Do you know what I mean? Because there must be a sort of.
What was it? Was it like after the Brighton game or something? I think Ali Gold put out a video saying that Tottenham are confident that both of them are going to do it. And I mean, we've lost 2 games on the bounce, and it's now we're all fearing the worst and things. But not, 2 games isn't going to change that kind of decision, is it? So if both of those stay, both of them extend over the next few years, I think we're in a really, really good place, and it's time now to take that next step and really go for it.
It's fucking annoying, is it? Do you know? I tell you what I think is the most gutting about this shit, mate. Is you remember back in the day? I mean, 15 years ago, 10, yeah, let's say 10, 11 years ago, when we were sort of pushing for those Champions League places under Redknapp for the first time, like properly. And then that was just kind of when City got bought out, taken over, spent loads of fucking money. And it felt like we'd spent the best part of like a decade or so building to that place organically, built the team up, gone through the Yol era, come close, sort of had the sort of few missteps, Ramos and AVB and stuff like that. But we got there in the end under Redknapp. It was all suddenly flying, and then obviously Man City come along. We've managed to ride that, sort of weather that storm, still kind of keep at it, keep building the club and all this sort of stuff. And now, you know, and yesterday's a stark reminder of it. Fucking Newcastle have come along with this buyout, and it does, it does just give you that kind of like it's deflating, right? As when you're following a club like us, and you could probably, I mean, to be fair, like let's strip all our rivalry aside or whatever shit. You look at even Liverpool. The fact they've only won one Premier League, I know my heart bleeds to them. They've only won one and a Champions League and basically everything else. But still, they should have been looking back on this Klopp era, which I think is coming to, I think it's winding down now. I think Klopp's on the steady decline now. I think we can all see that. But they should have looked back on Jurgen Klopp's tenure as probably having won the Premier League 3 or 4 times or something like that. But they obviously just haven't, because they've got this sort of behemoth-like City that's come along. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah, and that's why I think the timing's really interesting of like this next, you know, this whole thing that we've been talking about the whole time. Conte, this summer, this January. Let's be real, we have not got that long before Newcastle are going to turn into a sort of Man City level team. So it's now or never for us as a club. This is the time where we need to go and do it, because if not, you know, instead of, you know, Man City are almost impossible to finish above in the league, which is why I don't have any concerns that Arsenal are going to do it, because they're just not. You know, Liverpool are an unbelievable football club, and they did it once in like 5 years, and one, you know, to beat Man City over a season, you can lose like two games maximum, and you have to win all the others with a huge goal difference on top of that as well. And I just don't think Arsenal are going to do that. But at the moment, there's one of those teams. In the next few, you know, in the 5-year outlook of the Premier League, Newcastle are probably going to end up being that level as well.
yeah.
So it's now or never, Tottenham. Just go out there and do it. For God's sake, man, this is it.
And I think, like you're saying, like if we are going to get more, whatever, if I shelve my misgivings about Conte and any other feelings about anything, what you can objectively say is that we are still a team with players like Harry Kane. Harry Kane he's still one of the best footballers in the world, in world football. I mean, people sort of talk about his contract coming to an end and, oh, I think he'll just sign for Spurs because nobody else will have him. That to me is total bollocks. If he runs down his contract and he's there on a free contract, I think anybody will take him. I think if Haaland or not, I think Manchester City would still take Kane on a free transfer. That's the sort of footballer we have. We're talking about a footballer that in the modern era is going to break Jimmy Greaves' record, which seemed absolutely impossible. And I guess it's always worth remembering that when you've got a player like him and you have a manager that, for whatever you want to say about the style or anything at the moment, at least who has this mentality, because you see that, right? And you see that in every single interview. Every single player will say Antonio Conte is just mad. I don't know if you saw the it wasn't Bonucci, it's Chiellini, I think, was saying that he did you see he sort of let something slip? He said that Paratici gave him a call during the summer, and he was just like, nah, never again. I couldn't work with Conte again, kind of thing. He was saying because he remembered the training sessions or something like that. Let me see. I'm not spreading misinformation.
I didn't see that, but I remember like that was like you could kind of see it in pre-season, like when he was almost sort of killing the players in Korea. But yeah, that's interesting. No, I didn't see that about Chiellini.
Let me just. I know. I'm spreading fake news there. Chiellini said he contacted Paratici just after he saw all the Spurs players collapsed on the pitch during pre-season. Just basically, you know, having a laugh, being like, "Fuck, I remember when that was me, man." Like those kids are gonna get like a kick in from Conte, kind of thing. So yeah, that's what.
And I do think like that is another thing which, again, I don't want to be doom and gloom at the moment. So I think that's another real cause for optimism. Is that I think everything about the design and the way that we're playing is manufactured by Conte, like to the letter. So I think I honestly believe we're holding back as a football club at the moment because Conte knows after the World Cup we're going to have this all over again with this weird break. So I think hopefully we'll start to see like the superior levels of fitness when other teams drop off. And I think like I saw Miguel Delaney talking about it in the Guardian. I think he was talking about how we're literally holding back on our fitness at the moment because Conte is going to prioritise the second half of the season. And if we can do that and still be in the mix for top four, which we are at the moment with 3 games to go before the World Cup, then hopefully we'll kick on, next phase of the season, and our sort of superior fitness levels will really, really sort of, as they did at the end of last season, will really see us home again.
I think the other thing as well, right, is everyone's talking about like, and rightly so, with Norway not being in the World Cup, saying Haaland's going to get arrested and all that type of stuff. If we just look at this selfishly, Kulusevski, Sweden aren't in the World Cup either. Kulusevski, we've already spoken about how important he is to our team. We've seen the impact he had on our team last year. He might be injured now. He might not be back until after the World Cup. But as Conte himself has said, this is a wild season. This is like 2 different seasons in one. So if we're starting next season with a fit and firing Kulusevski, who's been able to rest for the past month, get back up to sort of match, maybe not match fitness, but at least kind of, or match sharpness, I should say. But he's definitely fitter now. Then that's definitely massive cause for optimism for us in terms of closing out the season, right?
And I was actually talking to our mutual friend Charlie about this morning. Actually, is that if you look at the players that are not going to the World Cup, like Kulusevski, who needs literally just the time to come back to fitness. If you look at the other players that are not at the World Cup, you got Emerson Royal, you got Lucas Moura, you got Brian Hill, you've got Spence, you've got Sessegnon. These are the players that at the moment need the most coaching. So hopefully they've almost got like another Antonio Conte preseason while the rest of the team are at the World Cup. And I think there's talk of him. I think he's going to take them. He's going to take them away somewhere warm weather to have like a little training camp. And again, I think we really sort of need that at the moment because those players that are staying behind are our lowest performing players, and I think they need that sort of coaching from. Let's be honest with Antonio Conte. He's a world class coach. He improves players. He's one of the best player improvers in the world at the moment. So again, it's another thing which hopefully could see us improve after the World Cup.
Do you reckon Royal won't go to World Cup then, Emerson?
I doubt it, to be honest. Like, as much as I pretend to, hype up this guy, he's a pub player, isn't he? Let's be honest, man. Like, the mask will slip for a second there.
I know, mate, you're going to be breaking hearts here, man. Like, people about...
Interesting though, yesterday, wasn't it, that he played right centre back for a little bit? That was the sort of curveball I didn't see coming. Because I know there's been talk of him playing in that position. And to be honest, I didn't think he was atrocious yesterday. I don't think he was one of our worst performers. I thought he was all right, mostly. But he's not. He's just not good enough, is he? But the thing about Emerson Royal is he's 6 months older than Jed Spence, which is that blows my mind every time I hear it. And we sort of talk about Spence as this young prospect. Emerson Royal is only 23 himself. Like, there's a lot to improve there. There's a lot of time to improve there and get better. So, who knows? I haven't fully written him off yet.
Did you see one of those like tin pot wannabe? What's his name? What's that fucking Italian journo? Here we go. What's he?
Romano.
Romano. Do you see some other Italian journo yesterday was saying that like we're preparing a shock bid for Bastoni in January and all that sort of stuff. Which I wouldn't be against that. I don't know how well he's played or not this year, but I can't.
Yeah, I think from what I gather, I think he's had a sort of mixed season, which is maybe it'll be time for both. It could be a good time for both to move on if he sort of will probably end up having to pay maybe Inter could do with the 90 million. If he's not the centre back he was the last couple of years, so maybe it's a good time for everyone to move. But I do have kind of hopes. We need to sort of improve our defence in January big time, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, because this is, I don't know, Dyer's just worrying me, man. Do you know what I mean? This is the thing. And I feel like such a traitor. Because I've been backing him. But then all of a sudden, it's just like, you know what's that saying? When somebody tells you who they are, believe them. And like seeing Eric Dyer these past couple of games, I'm just suddenly like, oh.
And I don't even think it's a slight on him. He's just got no rotation whatsoever.
No.
There's no one to come in. So just buy someone. And I think we missed a real trick in buying, not buying Kim Min-jae, who's been unbelievable for Napoli. I think it was like 8 million, and he would have been the perfect signing there. But
did you see that other ITK that was saying like Spurs have in private admitted to Son that they were wrong for not signing him. I'm like, in what world did that happen? Like, do you think Levy called him into his office and was just like, "I'm very sorry, Hunmin. We
it seems
failed
a bit
you."
like a bit like racist that we're dragging him into the office to tell him sorry for not signing another South Korean, doesn't it?
Yeah, he's like, "Oh, great. I'd never heard of him, to be honest, but oh mate, it's been an interesting one. You first fuck the football. You went to watch Halloween. I saw you tweet saying you went to watch Halloween Kills after after the game yesterday. Did that cheer you up?
Well, after watching 90 minutes of that, it was definitely not on a level of that scary. But I think interesting because we've been friends for a long time now. But and we obviously met through Tottenham. But our the thing which drew, I don't know if you remember back in the day, the thing which drew us together was our love of Dexter.
Yeah.
That's how we became close friends, is by talking about Dexter every week. And my coping mechanism is when Tottenham are bad, is I try and sort of pretend that I throw myself into my other interests. Like yesterday, I've watched 3 films since we lost to Newcastle. I'm trying to pretend that if I'm into films more than I'm into football, which of course is not true. It's a distraction for 90 minutes, but then as soon as that 90 minutes is up, it's like, oh shit, we lost, and I've got that sort of eating away at me for the rest of the week. But my sort of coping mechanism with Tottenham is if we have a bad result, I'll try and surround myself in films. So I watch Halloween Ends, which is actually all right, to be fair. I think it's the best one of the trilogy. But I love that in our little WhatsApp, between me and you and WhatsApp, we just pretty much just spend all day talking about the films that we've just seen.
Yeah. I'm hopefully gonna watch a film called The Feast. I think it's called The Feast. So it's weirdly, it's a Welsh film about I don't know. I think it's about some sort of elite people that live in the valleys in some big house, but I'm guessing they eat their servants or something weird like that. I'm not 100% what it's about. I try not to read too much about films nowadays. I don't know if you find this as well with trailers. You watch a trailer and you're just like, I kind of feel like I've watched a prime example of this, right? And I guess we know the story because it's based on real world events and stuff like that. But have you seen the new film coming out about Harvey Weinstein? It's got Carey Mulligan and stuff like that in it.
Yeah.
But when you see the trailer, it feels like you've got all the actual beats of the entire film. It's like you're watching a minor version, a small version of the entire film. And I find they do that a hell of a lot more with trailers now. Nope, I thought all the sort of the early burn trailers were oh, this is cool. This is really mysterious. I don't really know what's going on here. But then when you saw the trailer that came out just before the film was released, they suddenly showed you so much of what was happening later on in the film, and it completely destroyed a lot of the mystique.
I think the idea of Nope was much better than the film itself. I preferred it when I didn't know anything about it, and there was kind of Jordan Peele's new film that no one actually knows what about. I would have loved to just gone into the cinema and seen it as not having an absolute clue what it was about. But it's kind of this sort of social media thing where I have to sort of see these trailers, and then what's an interesting thing now is there's not just a trailer now, there's a breakdown of the trailer where someone on YouTube will break down every single frame of the trailer and sort of look for clues. And I'm sadly obsessive with stuff like Marvel, that I end up watching those, and then by the time the actual film comes along, there's no surprises anymore because everyone sort of assumed that it was going to happen and guessed it was going to happen from the comics and all that kind of stuff. It's a weird thing, but it's interesting that you mentioned the Feast, because at the moment, I know we're both big fans. I feel like horror at the moment is the best genre going. All the sort of best films that are being made are horror films.
Smile was great, wasn't it?
And there's a film coming out on Friday called Barbarian, which is supposed to be mentally good, which I'm looking forward to. Yeah, Smile's really good. There's all the sort of indie horrors that get made on Shudder that are really good. I definitely think it's the most exciting genre at the moment. I feel like half the horror films in the world at the moment seem to be set in an Airbnb where someone's in a house for the weekend and something goes horrifically wrong. I watched a Danish one the other day called Speak No Evil, which is just about these 2 families that go on holiday together, which is probably the most fucked up film I've seen this year. But
really?
That's another Shudder film, and that's really good. But everything seems to be taking place in Airbnbs, which makes me never want to go for a weekend away ever again.
Which is the film that's on, I think it's an Amazon Prime one that's set in an Airbnb, but the guy is basically it's the killer is renting an Airbnb but then subletting the Airbnb and doing all sort of...
Yeah, I have seen it, but I can't remember the name of it. There's
the one... It was really good, that one, actually.
Was it The Nest with Jude Law as well, that was set in some kind of Airbnb, and bodies, everything just sort of starts, that film that we both called My Friends Hate Me, or whatever it's called.
Oh, that was brilliant. Yeah, you told me about that one.
So everything just sort of starts with friends going away for the weekend, so don't think anyone should ever go away for the weekend anymore.
Yeah, just stay at home. That's it. All right, Bill. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for coming on, mate. And we should probably write something again soon, shouldn't we?
Yeah, man. Let's get the Spurs wipe. Let's get the band back together. Because I feel like I genuinely believe that when this sort of era, when it's sort of doom and gloom and the knee-jerk, I think that's when the sort of most. That's when I feel like we most need to do stuff together. Because just if you can't laugh at yourself when you're in these kind of situations, then what's the point of even being a Spurs fan? So yeah, let's get the old band back together, man.
It's the most galvanising time. Do you know what the thing I often here's one of those for anyone listening that's still listening that's interested. Do you know it's mad, Bill? If you think probably about 5-6 years ago, we basically wrote a pilot for like Ted Lasso, and then Ted Lasso got made, didn't it? And we were like, oh
yeah,
what?
I've seen there's something else as well. I've seen there's another mockumentary about a football team coming up, which is, again, we sort of wrote that back in the day. So yeah, let's get back into it. Let's get piggyback this Ted Lasso hype.
If there's any producers listening, right, Bill and I's this is the elevator pitch. A group of influencers get enough money, they build enough of a platform that they manage to buy a non-league club, and they try and bankroll the club with basically kind of cash donations from their million-strong audience, and hilarity ensues.
We basically foretold the Wrexham story, didn't we? Is what we did.
Yeah, there you go. That's it. So
like 5 years ago. Ryan Reynolds, let's make a fictional version of the Wrexham story. Ryan Reynolds can back it. We'll be sorted.
Exactly. Or if anyone listening wants to sort of, if you work for Netflix or Amazon Prime or anything like that, give us some money and we'll make something for you. It'll be good. Promise.